Let's start with L'Oreal. Paul mentions the company. It's a fresh cosmetics and consumer products group focusing on hair and skin products.
Yeah, it's got a market cap of 95, almost $96 billion, PE of 15.91, dividend yield of 1.77%. Great company.
Paul, you've been a long-time supporter of this one.
Yes, look, the reason I like it, it's certainly the largest player in the space. Although you would probably argue that there are a couple of big global companies that have a food and cosmetics focus that ought to be considered at this time. So, for example, Procter & Gamble, I think people are familiar with. They, of course, have the Head & Shoulders range. Then, in addition, there is Unilever, which is European, which has a substantial business in things of this nature, but also includes things like ice creams and foodstuffs. Within the beauty-specific arena, one might consider Estee Lauder, although it's about a third of the size of L'Oreal. And then it could also be argued that if you really like this space, you could be looking at companies like CVS, Caremark, Rite Aid. So these are the big US pharmacy chains. But as far as it goes, for me anyway, L'Oreal is the definite preferred entry. They're big in the United States of America, huge in Europe, very big in Latin America. Remember, Brazil is probably the most attractive market in the world for these kinds of cosmetic products. And remember, L'Oreal is 50% stuff that you put in your hair and 50% of stuff that you rub on your skin, which is both of the two major categories when it comes to personal care.
I want to have a look at the share price graph at this point, and Chris, you can weigh in here in terms of the performance. We obviously see a dip which is correlated to the broader market at the moment, just in the latter stages there.
Yeah, but having said that, Bronwyn, I think, we're going back to your original comments. This is a real staple. If you look at the kind of products we're talking about, it's interesting where they're pitched. You're below a Clarins or a Clinique, for example. It's not that kind of priciness. So it's getting that kind of broad market out there, but kind of middle to upper, I would say. So I think it's pretty defensive.
Paul, you want to stand on that pretty defensive comment from Chris, given the fact that you and your clients have been long-term shareholders of L'Oreal?
Yes, look, it's listed in France, so some of the share price movement we've seen has been a function of the way that it's moved relative to the US dollar, because I think that share chart you were showing there was probably the US ADR.
It is the US ADR.
The other interesting thing about this company is its shareholder base. So it is roughly 20% held by Nestlé, the big Swiss corporation, and then another 33% of the shares are held by the Bettencourt family. Because remember, Eugene Schuller, the founder of the company, his descendants is Liliane Bettencourt, who's one of the richest women in the world. She's in her 90s, and the chances are that that Bettencourt stake is going to get distributed to the various recipients of her will, ultimately. So we think that L'Oreal, at its scale, is probably in play. That's another thing that's interesting. Maybe Nestlé could come for some more of them. Maybe they could buy back the Nestlé stake or buy back some of the family stake. So that increases the prospect of corporate action and higher returns.
I want to get Chris's comment here on whether that excites you, Chris, the fact that it is in play.
Yeah, it certainly does, Bronwyn. And there's another element to this we haven't discussed, and that is that in terms of the emerging black middle class here, L'Oreal's got a company called Carson's, which it picked up about 15, 20 years ago, hair relaxer. But the nice thing about it, it's by far, and this is what I'm told because I don't use it myself, you understand, it's by far the most sensitive and softest hair relaxer out there, because some of them are very, very rough indeed. But this one has done remarkably well in the African hair market for many, many years. So there's even a connection to South Africa and the rest of Africa.
Hot or not, Mr. Turan, unless you want to add something else before we move to a decision.
Yeah, look, I think people will be most familiar with the Elvive range of shampoos, which are market leaders around the world by sales. But remember, they are a multi-brand company. So if you talk about cosmetics, they go right up to some of those very expensive, high-end new brands like Urban Decay and so on, which are very big sellers. So they cover the market well, and I think they do a lot of R&D, because a lot of this market has to do with that. I think what I like most about it is the aspirational element. So you're really talking about a company which, like the beer companies and all of the others that we talk about, has the opportunity to do that premiumization thing. Studio 9 thing, stuff for putting in your hair to make it stand up, like people use gels, that's the term. I just think it's got a great coverage, and I'm definitely hot on this one.
And Chris, are you hot or not?
Very much so, like Paul. Maybe not quite as hot as Paul, but definitely hot, yes.